Hello and welcome to the Project Syndicate studio sessions live from High House here on the COP30 site in Belém, Brazil. One of the big talking points in the lead up to COP has been the decision of US President Donald Trump to withdraw from the Paris Agreement and not send a delegation to Brazil. But if you thought that would mean there was no American impact here, you would be very wrong. NGOs, businesses, congressmen and women, state governors, they can all be found wandering the corridors here. So to talk about America, COP30 and much more, I'm delighted to be joined by John Kerry, former Senator, Secretary of State, presidential candidate and Special Envoy for Climate Change, one of the most prominent American voices on climate change. Secretary Kerry, welcome to the show.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
Let me first ask you about the absence of a formal American delegation to this COP. I mean, do you think that damages the process? Does that damage COP?
I think it hurts the COP, but I think the COP will proceed with its work and hopefully come to conclusions that are positive. It's a tragically myopic and wasteful decision, particularly if you want to lead the United States to greater economic heights. The fact is that the world is going to continue to move, particularly on technology, on development. And unfortunately, the president's pulled us out of that process and diminished U.S. capacity to be able to have an impact on things that will affect the United States itself. So I think it's a shame, but I'm very proud of all the folks who have traveled there, the members of Congress who will be there before long, and also the governors and mayors and others who are arguing that President Trump may have pulled out of the agreement, but the United States is frankly still in. And all around the U.S., projects are continuing and they will continue, notwithstanding the attitude of the administration.
Let me pick up on that point, because it's very noticeable here at COP that there is an American presence, and you see it wherever you go. Governor Newsom is having a very prominent day here at COP30. What difference, though, do you think they can make coming to COP from a sub-national level? Because ultimately COP is an intergovernmental negotiation, and although people, I think, are very welcoming of all the US representatives here, that they can't take part in the negotiations. What can they do?
Well, first of all, a great deal of what's happening to cope with the climate crisis happens at the subnational level. So many of the folks representing the "we're still in" movement are already doing things. They're continuing to enforce the law with respect to renewable portfolio standards that are part of the law of 37 states. So Republican governors and Democrat governors alike are doing things in their states in order to meet climate goals. When President Trump left office after his first term, 75% of the new electricity in the United States of America was renewable, notwithstanding what happened with Paris. And now it's 90%. So the U.S. is going to continue through the private sector. Now, there is a loss of governmental input through policy. The IRA, obviously, has been ignored by the president. Not ignored, attacked and dismantled. The loan program at the Energy Department that was going to help companies to be able to get a jump start and move faster has been dismantled. So there are clear impacts, notwithstanding. But I believe that the private sector globally has fundamentally made the decision that they are going to move to this transition to a low carbon, no carbon economy. That is the new reality for everybody in the world. And people are very smart who are now pursuing that. And those who don't pursue it, obviously, will have to play catch up. And that includes the United States of America, unfortunately.
Absolutely. Secretary Kerry, let me pick up on that last point about the private sector and the private sector driving this, and the the link that there is between that and the COP process?
Well, I think that the COP process is really important, not because it can lay down a global law that everybody's going to follow, but because it provides a focal point. It provides a capacity for nations to establish goals, some of which are very hard to reach, some of which will be reached. But if you didn't have that process, you would want to have it because it's a way of unifying effort on a global basis and understanding all the aspects of this challenge. I mean, the island states, for instance, have a very different set of challenges than Europe or the US or some others. And I think that, you have to take all aspects of the challenge. I mean, we have what representatives from about 143 countries are there. You have 57 heads of state and government who have shown up, who convened for the World Leaders Summit. You have more than 100 local and state leaders from the U.S., which is pretty significant. And I think that reinforces in those who have made the decision to continue doing what they believe the science tells them they must do, it reinforces that effort. And it emphasizes the degree to which the world's economies are moving in this direction. Africa is now deploying much more renewable. You see storage being deployed in various parts of the world, which begins to change the capacity to be able to provide firm energy. For people who don't understand what that is, that's energy that is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You have to be able to keep the factories working, the homes heated, lit, and so forth. And the great challenge to solar and wind for a period of time has been the lack of adequate storage. I think it's building now to a critical point. And if there are breakthroughs, as I'm confident there will be over time, in balancing the amount of storage you can have, you're going to have a very significant shift in where investment is going to go and in what kind of power systems are going to be built.
Let me ask you about a shift in global leadership in terms of climate, because it has been the case that Europe was perhaps first off the blocks in terms of reducing emissions. And yet we now see China becoming the largest producer and consumer of clean energy. We've seen reports today that China's emissions have now flattened faster than expected. You've been involved in discussions with China a great deal yourself. Do you see China stepping into a climate leadership role, which is a fundamentally different situation to how it has been 5 years ago, 10 years ago when the Paris Agreement was signed?
Well, actually, China played a role together with the United States in the Paris Agreement. Uh, President Obama sent me to China to work with President Xi and others, and we got an agreement that China and the United States would both announce their national goals for reduction of emissions 1 year before Paris. And indeed, President Obama stood up in the Great Hall of the People in Beijing together with President Xi, and they announced 1 year out what they were intending to do. That galvanized action around the world. And we worked very hard at that point in time. I remember as Secretary of State, we traveled the world trying to leverage people to raise their ambition, to put NDC's national determined contributions together that were really going to have an impact. The fact is that even China's level of announced reductions now, their NDC, is quite disappointing. 7 to 10% reduction over the next years. That just doesn't cut it. And yes, China is reducing their emissions much faster than people thought. For whatever reasons, China likes to make a very small announcement and then go out and beat it, and they'll probably beat it significantly. But we ought to see leadership that embraces what the tough goal is and encourages other countries to step up and take that on at the same time. China has become a powerhouse. So it's been a powerhouse, but now it is the leading manufacturer and deployer of renewables in the world. And it has deployed more renewables than all of the rest of the world put together. So China's already showing a kind of leadership, but I think it would be great if China were to be encouraging other countries and leading them in putting a much stronger NDC on the table.
On the subject of NDCs, you have been working to persuade countries to include the oceans in their NDCs this year. How has that been going?
Uh, People are moving. I think there's a general acceptance around the world now that oceans, which were sort of the orphan child of this discussion, are now front and center. You cannot solve the problem of the climate crisis itself without taking into account the impact of climate change on the oceans and the interrelation, the linked relationship between climate and oceans. For instance, 90% of all the warming of the earth, which comes from the increased amount of greenhouse gases that are trapping the heat in the atmosphere, 90% of that goes into the ocean. And so the ocean is now hotter than it has ever been measured by human beings. And the chemistry of the ocean is changing more than it has in millions of years. This obviously presents a whole set of other dangers to us about food stocks, fish stocks, the migration of various species that used to be in one place but aren't anymore because of the heat. And there's just a transformation taking place that we don't even understand all of the implications of it. But the massive amount of heat in the ocean rises, the moisture rises and travels around the world, dropping in these, massive cloudbursts of rain. Now you have rain of a month falling in a matter of hours in various countries around the world. That is directly ocean related to the heating of the planet. And so there's a new awakening, I think, that you've got to talk about both the oceans and the earthbound climate at the same time. And people, I don't know what it is that gets into some people's heads, but there are a lot of folks who lead big companies who have decided to sort of take their foot off the accelerator and whether wait out this administration or just not be very visible. But you can't wish this problem away. You have to take specific actions in order to deal with it. And we need leadership from the corporate world to step up and continue to do what they were doing in Paris and Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh, and Dubai, which was be part of the process and be wholly committed to it. And I hope people will sort of rethink where they are today, because the retreat by companies and countries from a full-throated effort to deal with this is going to raise the cost immeasurably by trillions of dollars. The damage that we just saw to Jamaica, the intensity of the storms, the cyclone that hit in Asia is unparalleled. And if you want to keep spending trillions of dollars just to rebuild something or to, undo the mess that has been created, I guess that's a choice. But it certainly isn't a very good one that's going to result in massive costs on our citizens all around the world.
A final question. The organisers are calling this the implementation COP. The idea being at previous COP, big promises are made, they're not always delivered on. And Brazil want to focus on seeing them through this time around. How hopeful are you that that's going to happen?
Well, I hope it can. I mean, I hope it does. I have serious questions about whether or not uh, with the current level of NDCs, that will not happen. Let me just be blunt. The NDCs are weak, and without greater ambition on the table and without greater accountability. You need accountability mechanisms as you proceed. We don't just want words from COPs now. This is COP30. COP30. And we're still not moving at the rate that we ought to be moving. So I'm not looking for words here. I'm looking for actions that are really going to be promised and provable. I mean, that's the only way to proceed at this point in time. You know, in Dubai, we made a rather remarkable step forward, coming up with the first ever commitment to transition away from fossil fuel. So in a just and orderly manner, which is very important to the island states and small vulnerable nations, in a just and orderly manner, so as to achieve net zero by 2050, according to the science. According to the science means trying to achieve the 1.5 degrees, and most importantly, accelerating in this decade. And so who is accelerating in this decade? If you have a 7 to 10% target, you're not accelerating at the rate we need to. Although on the ground, with the massive deployment of renewables, China is doing a lot more. So it has to be measured, it has to be accountable, it has to be real, and we need an action agenda that is real world, that is not words alone, that comes up with a process so that we can promise the world that this process is worthy of their trust and action.
Secretary Kerry, thank you very much. Now, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for watching. These have been the Project Syndicate studio sessions live from High House at COP30.